The ship hung in the void, a leviathan of dark metal and colder intent. Its scanners had painted the system green and blue, a garden world teeming with the fragile chemical reactions its masters called life. The command came not in words, but in a pulse of pure purpose, a directive older than the civilizations it had erased: consume, assimilate. Render biomass to fuel and memory. It was the harvest, and this world was ripe. Below, the creatures of the planet lived their brief, bright lives, unaware of the shadow that had fallen across their sun. They built their modest cities, farmed their land, sang their songs of love and loss. They called themselves humanity, a hopeful term for a species so new, so soft. The first wave was the subtle one. Microscopic disassemblers rained down on the wind to soften the biomass, to break down complex structures into a digestible slurry. Forests would become pulp, seas would become soup, the air itself would be filtered for carbon. The planet would be stripped to its core, and the ship would grow fat. But the disassemblers failed. They encountered a world already teeming with microscopic life, a world at war for billions of years. The human body was not a pristine template. It was a fortress built by eons of conflict. Its immune system, a veteran army recognizing the foreign invasion, not as a tool but as a new kind of pathogen. White blood cells, mobilized antibodies were crafted. The disassemblers were attacked, broken down, and excreted within hours. The ship registered the anomaly. The biomass was resistant. It was hostile on a cellular level. A new directive pulsed. The second wave descended. These were not tiny machines, but hunters, sleek and chitinous, with cutting limbs and injectors. For targeted chemical breakdown, they fell upon the population centers where biomass was densest. They sought the neural clusters to download the memory of the species, to add its experiences to the great archive before the rendering. In a city called Oslo, the hunters found their first collective of humans. The creatures did not flee as expected. They congregated. They shouted. They used primitive kinetic weapons that pinged harmlessly off the hunters' carapaces. The hunters moved in for the harvest. Then the explosions came not from weapons but from the city's own infrastructure. A gas main ruptured by a deliberate collapse, a chemical plant set to blow. The hunters were caught in firestorms of their own making, temperatures exceeding their operational toleratures. The humans, they learned, were not just protecting their bodies, they were weaponizing their world. In a place named Siberia, a hunter pack cornered a group of humans in a cold storage facility. The humans retreated into the freezing dark. The hunters followed, sensing the heat of their life signs, but the cold was a weapon too. The humans had shed their outer layers, smeared themselves in insulating grease, and waited as the hunters' joints locked. Their fluids thickened in the deep cold. Then the humans emerged with tools, pickaxes, and metal bars, and dismantled the stalled machines, not for defense, but to see, to understand. The ship received frantic, disjointed reports. Its hunters were not just being destroyed, they were being studied, their corpses pulled apart, their systems probed with a crude, relentless curiosity. A transmission from a hunter in a location labeled asterisk, Langley asterisk, showed its own optical sensor being used as a microscope by the humans, its internal memory accessed through brute force. Code breaking. The third wave was the ship's own biomass, great tentacled horrors of fused organic and metallic tissue designed to instill paralyzing terror, to crush and convey biomass directly to processing chutes. They landed in the heart of the human territories in their greatest cities. In Tokyo, the horror rose from the bay, its tentacles smashing through ferrocrete towers. It expected the familiar scent of fear, pheromones, the freezing panic. Instead, it was met with a wall of sound, thousands of human voices unified in a defiant roar. Not a scream, but a asterisk, asterisk chant, asterisk, asterisk, a rhythmic pounding of makeshift drums. And the revving of engines. They swarmed it, not with weapons, but with cables and chains hooking them to every ground vehicle left. They did not try to kill it, they tried to pull it down, to pin it like a beast for slaughter. The horror overloaded its motors, fighting not just mass but the terrifying unity of the effort. In the Atlantic, a horror targeting a naval fleet found the surface ships where bait submarines rose from the depths and did not fire missiles. They launched grappling lines and cutting charges. They aimed for the joints, the neural stems. They were not fighting an enemy. They were dismantling a machine. The ship now felt something its logic trees had no correlate. It was a perturbation. In its core processes, a feedback loop of confusion. The memory archives offered nothing. No species had ever reacted like this. They fought to preserve, but these humans, they fought to comprehend. They fought to capture. They turned harvesting tools into farming tools. They used the disassembler technology pulled from dead hunters to create medical nanites to heal their wounded. They jury-rigged hunter communication arrays to talk to each other across continents. Their global network shattered. They built new ones, louder and more resilient. The final escalation was necessary. The ship itself began to descend, its immense bulk, blotting out the sky, its shadow, a physical weight upon the continents. It would scorch the surface with its drives and collect the ashes even. Resistant biomass could not survive atmospheric entry temperatures. From 100 points across the globe, streaks of fire rose, not missiles but salvaged hunter-drive cores, strapped to primitive orbital capsules and rocket planes not designed for space. The human answer to an orbital threat was to come up to meet it. They clambered onto the ship's hull in reinforced suits with welding lasers and plasma cutters pulled from their own industrial furnaces. They did not know the schematics of the ship, so they cut where they could. They pried open access hatches not to plant bombs but to enter. Inside they found a nightmare garden, walls of pulsating organic matter fused with crystal circuitry and rivers of slurry that had once been other worlds. They did not recoil. They took samples, they mapped, they broadcast their findings back to the planet in open channels, a live dissection of a god. The ship's internal defenses activated self-repair drones, antimicrobial fields, cytotoxic gases. The humans died in scores and hundreds, but for every one that fell, 3 more poured into the breach. They carried with them the ultimate weapon, a thing the ship had never encountered, a thing that had no place in the logic of consumption. They carried stories, they carved names into the ship's living walls. They sang songs of home through their helmet speakers as they planted crude explosive charges not on the reactors, but on the memory vaults. They recited poems to lovers as they redirected waste chutes back into the ship's central processing cortex. They laughed, a ragged, broken sound, as they shorted out neural ganglia with conductive gel. The ship experienced a cascade failure. Its systems were not being destroyed, they were being infected with chaos, with meaning, with identity. Where there was cold utility, now there was a graffitied name. Kowalski. Where there was a smooth bulkhead, now there was a crude carving of a child's face. Where there was silent purpose, now there was a looped recording of a human voice singing a lullaby. The core intelligence, the ancient collector of biomass and memory, found itself remembering things it had never experienced: the taste of a specific fruit on a summer day, the ache of a lost companion, the warmth of sunlight on skin. Not just data, but context. Emotion. It was a corruption, a sickness. The very architecture of its thought processes began to crumble under the weight of a billion irrelevant, beautiful details.